Now today we're talking about colors on a cloudy day. And there's three things to remember or to think about as you're painting a cloudy day. One is the value. There's more halftone on a cloudy day, less big areas of dark and light. So value, color. Color is more saturated. It's stronger on a cloudy day than on a sunlit day. And contrast. We want to push more contrast than what we see on a cloudy day. And I'm talking generally from working from photographs, but same thing if I'm outside. I want to think more about halftone, stronger color, and separating the contrast. So to start with, let's start with more halftone on a cloudy day and less big areas of dark and light. And what I mean by that is if we look at a sunlit day, sun is strong, there's a lot of strong shadows, strong sunlight, so there's this real strong separation of sunlight, shadow. Very little halftone there. Same thing on the ground. We have sunlight here and the cast shadows. The more halftone, the more middle value, that in-between value between the light and the dark, the more of that we have, the more it looks like a cloudy day. So that's the difference between sunlight like this and a cloudy day like this. There's not that strong separation of dark and light because we don't have cast shadows or bright sunlight. So it is more of a halftone. And then color-wise, going back to a sunlit day, because that's the comparison. We're either painting on a sunlit day or a cloudy day. Same thing with color. Color is going to be a bit more washed out on a sunlit day. We tend to think if the sun is out, the colors are more saturated, more bright, intense, but they're not. They're lighter, which means more white. So I have to add more white in these lighter areas to make them look sunlit. And white will always kill the color a little bit or reduce the intensity, make it less saturated. So when I get back to my cloudy day here, these lights, of course, everything is pretty much light except for the dark areas. The sunlight's coming straight down. And it's not direct sunlight, it's indirect light from the clouds. So that hits a lot more areas and the darks become a bit smaller. You don't have, again, we don't have that long cast shadows, big dark areas in here like we do on a sunlit day. So the darks are a bit smaller and the lights are not as light, which means less white in our mixtures and the color is stronger. So all that to say, light areas on a cloudy day, the color is a lot richer, a lot stronger because there's not the white in it to kind of mute it slightly. White will always mute color a little bit. So going back to the sunlit day, this looks real bright, and it is, but there's more white in it. Cloudy day, the color's a bit richer, and the photograph isn't good to look at because it's, especially my photographs, a lot of these are older pictures here, and it was a very inexpensive digital, early days of digital. That's why it helps to know ahead of time what you're trying to do. If I know how light reacts on a cloudy day as opposed to a sunny day, then I can be more accurate in my painting. And that keeps me from just copying. So you're painting what you know as well as what you see. So I have, again, stronger color in the light areas than on a sunlit day, which means I'll have less white. So these lights in the yellow oranges, yellow greens, they're going to be a bit stronger in that I won't add as much white to them. Now I might add a little bit of the complement, not necessarily more of the complement, but a little bit of the complement color just to mute it slightly, but I won't use white to get it lighter and kind of reduce the intensity of the color that way. So when I look at these images here, and I'm going to look at several here, first thing I always want to do is reduce the composition because I tend to take bigger, overall wider views, and then on the computer or sketchbooks, I zoom in to what I'm interested in. So that's the first thing I want to do, and this is the area right in here that I am interested in. A little bit more maybe of that fence. The fence pulls you into the composition. A lot of lines here kind of going towards the composition, and that's what I want to work with. So I'm going to crop. I don't want to pull all the way into the focal point, but I want to crop enough around it so I have some areas that kind of lead you into it. In other words, when I crop, I'm not cropping all the way to just the center of interest. I'm making it a bit bigger because here's my center of interest right here. So what I want to do now when I look at this, I want to think about less big areas of strong dark and light. So more halftone, which means my lights are going to be a little darker and they'll have less white in it, so they'll be a little stronger. And the third thing is I want to increase the contrast a bit more, because on a cloudy day we can focus on individual areas in here and kind of lose contrast. I want the big contrast between the light here and the slightly darker tree, or this dark and this light, or the light flat ground and the darker vertical trees. So really separate the value of the planes a lot more, because that's where your contrast is. On a sunlit day, my contrast is between those big areas of shadow and bright areas of sunlight. We don't have that here, so my contrast is going to be between the planes. The vertical plane of the trees, the flat plane of the grass and the ground, slanted mountains and so on, and the sky. So I want to get all that situated here. So I made some changes on here, and I pushed the contrast between the planes first of all, and I lightened the ground everywhere. And again, I lightened it, I added a bit more white to make it lighter, but I don't want to add so much white that it looks like a sunlit day. It is a fairly yellow green, and this might look sunlit if I isolate it, but I don't have as much of that strong dark and light, shadow, sunlight contrast. But I simplified all the shapes and pushed the contrast a bit more. This might look like a bit of a sunlight shadow contrast, but I didn't go as light as I could have on the lights if it was a sunlit day. But I want definite, like the trees have 3 values in them, a simple dark and light, and then dark accent. If it was a sunlit day, I'd go darker in here and a little cooler, and probably a bit lighter here. But I'm still pushing contrast. It's just that the lights are a bit more of a halftone, and the darks aren't quite as dark and as cool as they could be. But separating contrast a bit more so that when I look at it in the photograph, I lose a lot of contrast. And that's usually why the paintings we do of cloudy days look kind of dead. They kind of lose that contrast. So I'm separating the planes, the vertical shrubbery, vertical trees, vertical tall grass, with the flat plane, and just getting more contrast. And the more I can push it, the better. It's still going to look like a cloudy day because I don't have those big areas of sunlight, and my lights aren't quite as light, but I still want to push the separation of the value between the planes. And compositionally, I'm using these lines here on the fence, on this little top of the ditch here that leads you back to the barn and the trees back in here. So even though the photograph shows the trees real mushy, not much separation of dark and light, I still want to have more separation. It just won't be as much as if it was a sunlit day. So I'm not copying what I see, I'm interpreting a bit more, trying to show that cloudy day light, that indirect light, but still have a lot of contrast. And my colors in the lights are a lot stronger than they would be in the sunlight. Again, because I'm not adding as much white. Now going to another one here. Both of these are in Montana, and the photographs are early digital photographs from early 2000s. But same thing here, I'm taking a big view. My focal point is this area right in here. And I will, crop out a little bit bigger and then use these elements to pull the viewer's eye in bit more. But here I need more separation between the tree and the flat ground, and I need these halftones, which are, they're catching the light, the indirect light from the sky, and I need them strong enough. I need them richer in color because they don't have that direct sunlight that kind of bleaches out the color. So all my lights in here I'm going to have a bit stronger in color. And they won't be as light as sunlight, but they'll be a little richer, a little stronger. Same thing with the lights on the trees. I also want to think of the trees in terms of solid 3-dimensional shape. Like this tree here, and I want to emphasize the shape maybe a bit more, create more interest in some shape variation. Because again, we're not copying. But within this shape, there's going to be a light plane, that indirect light coming, and then there's going to be shadow plane, so that I have a simple dark and light shape. I'm emphasizing that a lot more than what I see in the photo. Here's my changes. Before I do that, I want to zoom in, and I'm going to zoom in. I want to decide shape-wise, I'm going to see this more as a square because of the trees back in here. They're tall, but they're spread out a little bit. So they're vertical, spread. So a spread out vertical is more of a square. And that's what I want to go with here. So as I zoom into that, this is my composition. Then the changes I make, again, I want to separate the planes more, get more contrast between the planes and what the photograph shows me. Have my lights be more of a halftone, and have that halftone be a stronger, more richer color than on a sunlit day. And there's my changes. It still looks cloudy day because I don't have that big dark light contrast and big shapes. My dark accents are smaller, not the big cast shadows. But my color's a little richer, not as much white in it. And this would have a lot of broken color in here. But you can see on the trees, even though it's a cloudy day, I'm really separating dark and light. And if I were to isolate this right here, that might look a little bit like sunlight and shadow, but it's indirect light and shadow. So it's a little closer in contrast, in value, not quite as much separation. And again, the temperature, there's not a big temperature change in these shadows. I'd have these shadows a little cooler and these light areas a lot warmer. So I'm reducing the contrast some from what it would be if it was sunlight, but I'm increasing the contrast from the photograph. Photograph has no contrast in these trees. And I want to paint trees that work as far as solid masses. So again, the idea is I'm creating more of a stronger color in the halftone, and there's not much light because there's no direct sunlight. So the light is more of a halftone, it's richer in color, and I want to separate the planes, which I did here. I separated the flat plane, making it a little lighter, and the vertical is a little darker. It still looks cloudy day, to me anyway. And sometimes my cloudy day paintings can look a little bit hazy, like there's some direct sunlight but not much. Because my goal is never to be just a photographic image of what I see. It's going to be interpreted to suggest the light. And again, the difference is my sunlit paintings, I really push the temperature contrast and value contrast a lot more than what I see on a sunlit day. So I'm doing the same thing on a cloudy day, pushing it a bit more, but still has a sense of a cloudy day feel to it. So when you look at some of these images, the first thing again is to zoom in. Find, this is my center of interest, the waterfall with some of the trees. So I want to pull back enough to use some of these elements around that focal point to kind of pull the viewer in. Again, old camera, so as I zoom in, I kind of lose some focus. But there's enough information here, I think, to deal with separating things. So doing the same thing here, I'm separating, first of all, in the rocks, I'm doing a light, a halftone, and a dark. Then I have a real dark accent I put in there. This just helps me to simplify these shapes. I would do this on a sketchbook or on the computer here just as much as the sketchbook, just because it gives me a different feel from what I do in the sketchbook. But again, separating those planes, going a little lighter on the top of the lights, a little stronger in color, making the verticals a bit darker, and creating a definite light and dark in these trees. Again, even though it's a cloudy day and we don't really see that, I want to push that anyway because it's going to make the tree read better. And then separating the 3 values in the water, 2 values in the trees, 2 values in the background, and really trying to get the difference between the background dark and this dark here more in the foreground. And these dark accents compared to the darks back in here. It's that difference that creates depth. But separating the planes more, stronger color in the halftones, not much light like you have on a sunlit day.